Hi everyone, welcome back to Diane's POV podcast. My name is Diane and I'm so glad to have you guys here with me, so let's get into the episode. So before I start this episode, I just wanted to give a little life update. So lately I've been doing a lot of work, like just working on Rhea, working on me, trying to like get back into working out consistently or like having like a workout routine. Um I've been hanging out a lot with Bizzle and he has a lot of energy, like a lot of energy, and all he wants to do is play. So it's been fun. And last week we got our first like snowfall, which is weird for the Midwest because I live in the Midwest. We usually get snow in like October. So it's kind of weird to get snow for the first time this year, like mid December. But honestly, the snow is beautiful. I went for a walk yesterday, which is like crazy because usually I don't like to like be cold. I don't like to walk outside in the winter. But I had like this weird urge to just like take a stroll. I walked for like 2 miles outside. I bundled up and it really just like made my weekend. It made my day. And I 1,000% recommend. It's such good vibes. So for today's episode, I wanted to talk about something that I've been going through and it's a huge part of my journey is learning to simplify my life, because for the longest like I romanticized the hustle culture and just like getting things done, and at some point I just like associated having so much on my plate and having a packed schedule to feeling more successful. And honestly, like my life felt like it was constantly on fast forward. But somewhere along the way, I kind of realized that I wasn't growing anymore. And all I was doing was adding more fuel to the fire and burning out. So for me, ever since I started college, I started a little bit earlier than I guess like most people. So I started college at 16 and I had this like 10-year roadmap that I had like all laid out. Like I knew what I was going to do and I knew what my life was going to look like. And at some point I was just like pushing myself harder and harder to feel accomplished. So I would add more and more to my plate. And in the beginning, like I was getting all these dopamine hits and I was like, look how much like I can do in a day. So it just like kind of promoted me to do more. You know what I mean? So it like pushed me to do more. So I started to romanticize the hustle culture until I hit a wall. Let me just like give you guys an example. So when I turned 18, I decided to apply to a bunch of jobs. I was working 2 jobs at a time while also like being a full-time student. And like when one job ends, I just start another one. Like that's just how I lived throughout my college career. And when I graduated back in December of 2023, some of my mentorship jobs just ended because they were like for seniors or whatever. And right when that ended, I picked up a volunteering gig and I was like volunteering at the hospital twice a week. And then on top of that, I was like, okay, like let me just start studying for the MCAT. Let me just give myself an extra month. So I decided to study 6 times a week, 5 to 8 hours a day, work about 16 to 20 hours in the lab, and also volunteer about 10 hours a week at the hospital. So I had this jam-packed schedule. Like I really had no room to breathe. And I convinced myself that this is what I needed to do in order to succeed and to get into med school and do what I wanted to do. And it's funny because like specifically in pre-med or pre-law, like all these undergrad programs where we're aiming to go to grad school are very competitive, and I feel like everybody's also like adding to their plates, and I'm like, how are they handling all this plus school plus their social lives? Like, I always was like mind boggled because like I gave up my social life, I gave up a lot of my free time in order to do all these things, and I kind of conditioned my way to live like this. So I was constantly on my toes, constantly in motion, and while it might sound somewhat productive, I was just like really just thinning myself out. And when it comes to burnout, it has to do with so many different things, right? Because it's the imbalance between demands and resources, meaning that you're constantly giving more than you're receiving in terms of support, rest, or recovery, right? So the key factors of burnout is excess workload, right? Taking on more than you can handle without any breaks, lack of control. At some point, you're going to start to feel powerless, whether it's in your job or your personal life. And this high standard that you set for yourself that are somewhat impossible, and just like looking for perfectionism, which honestly just leads to you neglecting yourself. And like burnout doesn't just happen overnight, right? It's a gradual process. It takes steps, and those steps, according to psychologist Christina Mashlech, I really butchered her name. However, her steps were: one, emotional exhaustion, right? So you're going to start to feel really drained, you're unable to cope, and you're constantly tired. And this is just due to that prolonged stress response that you have initiated. The second thing is depersonalization, right? So eventually you develop a negative attitude towards work or life or anything that's honestly stressing you out. And that is due to the fact that chronic stress responses dampen the brain reward system. The more you do something, the less of a reward you're going to get. And that's just how our brains work. And towards the end, you start to feel unproductive and incompetent, even if you're like putting in the work and the effort that requires you to do the task. It becomes harder to feel motivated. Therefore, you're going to look for other things to fill that void. And a lot of the time, it's like adding more to your plate rather than like realizing that you need to take a step back. So, as I mentioned, a good chunk of my life, I've been in very like competitive environments, whether it was school, work, or pre-med culture, in general. And I've always felt like I was falling behind for some reason. Like I would look around and see like people juggling crazy amount of work, research, clinical work, whatever. And I would honestly feel like I wasn't doing what I needed to do in order to succeed. And I feel like this just like made my anxiety 10 times worse in general, right? Because now I feel like I'm falling behind. I need to figure out a way to get back on track or kind of exceed expectations in order to be seen as a good candidate. So on top of like already juggling so much, I was looking for work studies, I was looking for research, clinical work, volunteering, and I was like starting to associate those things with feeling successful or accomplished in a way. And it's funny because there's a whole psychological term called the complexity bias, which basically says that we have the tendency to think that complicated solutions are better than the simple ones, even when the simpler ones would work just as well. So we have all these options, but we choose the hardest one because we associate that with success. And a lot of the times we kind of do it subconsciously. Like I kind of did it subconsciously because even though I physically put myself in these situations where I was juggling way more than I could handle, I was like subconsciously associating that with being successful. Like I knew that being in such a competitive field means that it's going to require a little bit more work, but a lot of that was mental load because I was always thinking about the next thing that I needed to do, and I was like putting so much pressure on myself at some point, I literally just exploded. And sometimes, like, now I ask myself this question, right? Is it helping me to grow or is it holding me back? And I also ask the question, am I overcomplicating this just to feel more accomplished? Right? Because, like, to get to the finish line, I can just easily walk to the finish line, or I can do freaking 3 somersaults and then every 3 seconds in order to get there. But we're still heading towards the finish line. So, one big lesson that I learned was my gut knows when it's time to let go. Right? Because a lot of the times we're just hoping that something might happen, and if we stay, we might get that reward. You know what I mean? So, we just keep ourselves in the same situations, even though we know that it's time for us to go. And that's kind of like what I incorporated into my life. Like, I learned to trust myself even when the decisions are really hard and uncomfortable. um I remember, like, one day I just woke up, right? And a lot of the times I just trust it, you know what I mean? And I decided that working in a clinic wasn't helping me grow, and there wasn't anything there for me anymore. Like, I could have stayed, right? The pay was decent. It wasn't the best, but I really could have stayed. I thought that I would probably stay there for maybe 2 to 3 years, because that was like pretty standard. A lot of people stayed for like 2 to 3 years. And a year and a half in, I realized that I just needed to go. And it was kind of crazy because there was this other opportunity that just like came up, and I was like, hey, I want to do this, right? This is where I need to be. So I decided to leave and literally put in my resignation without batting an eye or overthinking it. And I was like, this is where I need to be right now. So yeah, just like being comfortable on walking away from situations that aren't meant for you anymore. And I'm not saying that it wasn't meant for me before, right? There's a reason that I was there, but at some point you need to move on. And that was the point for me. And even through other positions or whatever, I like knew I needed to walk away from it and try something else or pursue something else. And I feel like that's what being in your 20s is all about. It's all figuring it out, and just like knowing that you don't need to know everything right now. So I made the hard decision of slowing down a couple of months ago, right? And it's kind of crazy because, like, after 5 years of nonstop hustle, slowing down felt so weird. And after, like, I probably mentioned this before, but during my trip, I literally noticed the fact that I needed to slow down because I couldn't help but wanting to do a million things at once, right? I'm looking for the next thing to do. And I remember, like, telling my sister, like, I was just sitting in my hotel room and I look at her and I'm like, this feels so weird. I have nothing to do. And it was just like no work, no studying, no mentorship, no applications, none of that. I was just there. And I realized, or I kind of felt like I was losing a piece of my identity at the time. But deep down, I knew I needed to take a break from it all, because I could have just stayed and continued to hustle and bustle and become numb to it all. But I didn't want to. And a lot of like these moments really just teach me that I need to trust my instincts, even though it's not easy, but it is necessary. Because a lot of the times, like, you know when you need to move on from something, whether it's a relationship, friendship, job, whatever. Like, you deep down know that you need to take a step back, or you need to move away from something, and you just need to trust it. Because one, our biology is so complex. Like, your body knows. Like, it's like a phrase that a lot of people use, like, your body knows when you need to do X, Y, and Z. And that really does also play into social situations as well. So after all of that, I honestly just didn't know what it felt like to have space in my life. So one thing that I did follow, at least I started to follow, and I had a conversation with my sister about this, is following the rule of three. And I just like made this up. I don't know if somebody else also had this idea, but I just started giving myself 3 days to do something, just because if I rush it, I start to overthink and my anxiety kicks in, whatever, right? So when I give myself the space and time to get things done, I feel less stress, right? And I put in my best work when I'm not stressed. And honestly, that small shift made such a huge difference. Like, knowing that I have a realistic window to finish something or do something that I wanted to do allows me to just focus on doing my best, right? Instead of just like overthinking, having high anxiety, and whatnot. And I know like a lot of people do say like when I do something last minute, I'm more productive or whatever. But I just want to like kind of differentiate being productive and being busy from actually moving forward, because a lot of the times like we do a lot of busy work or we procrastinate till the last minute, and now we are like swamped with so much work, and you have to like meet your deadline at the end of the day. You can meet your deadline with a clear mind, with good vibes, or you can meet your deadline hella stressed. And honestly, after experiencing both, I'm gonna go with the first choice. I want to like complete things with a clear mind. I want to do things calm and collected. Like, why would I want to induce stress when it's not necessary? So instead of being a multitasker, I just want to focus on one thing at a time. And I kind of want to break bigger tasks into smaller, manageable steps. And on top of that, like, I would rather take time to breathe and rest rather than just run on empty. And on top of that, like, a lot of the times it may be the same workload, but like when you simplify it, it isn't about doing less, it's about doing things in a way where you don't feel overwhelmed. So you can still have the same workload, but like manage it in a better way. So here are a couple ways that I kind of simplified my life. One is letting go of things that don't serve me anymore, right? And I feel like this is a very popular thing too. So whether it's a job, task, commitment, relationship, whatever, if it does not serve me in any way, then it's time for me to go. The question is it helping me grow or is it holding me back? And on top of that, I am taking my health more seriously. I will not put myself on the back burner for literally anything. So I stopped like ignoring the signals that my body was giving me. So instead of pushing myself through the burnout or through anything, I will just start listening to what I need, because nothing is honestly worth diminishing your health for. And just like another main thing that I wanted to include in my top three would be reframing productivity, right? Because sometimes you equate your worth with how much you can do in a day instead of focusing on what truly matters. So slowing down and like simplifying life doesn't necessarily mean that you're not moving forward. It honestly just means that you're creating space in order for you to move forward intentionally. And on top of that, like, our bodies were never designed to induce so much stress at the same time, right? Because chronic stress and anxiety will have not only a negative impact on your mental health, but it will also have an impact on your physical health. It will shorten your lifespan. And the way it does this is actually kind of interesting. So when stress is induced, right, it would cause your telomeres to shorten. So telomeres are this protective cap. So it's like a little sequence for your DNA at the end that protects it during division, right? And when chronic stress is induced, it actually accelerates telomere shortening, which also is associated with cellular age and shortening of your lifespan. Basically, you're getting older faster. And a lot of the times, like, just in general, there's so many different factors in today's day that is also linked to accelerating aging. And a lot of it has to do with stress, whether it's your diet, your exercise routine, work, stress, mental load. There's so much that causes chronic inflammation in our body, and stress is definitely one of them. And stress itself not only like increases or accelerates aging, it also is linked to so many different conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, and those are also contributing to the reduction in lifespan. So it's not only reducing your lifespan, but it's also going to include some chronic illnesses that will also make those years a little bit harder to live. So honestly, like the key to life in general is to prioritize yourself, especially your rest, because how are you able to take on the next day if you didn't get proper sleep the day before? And also just like taking care of yourself mentally and physically. So another big part of self-care is setting boundaries, right? Protecting your time is an act of self-care. So saying no to things that drain your energy, saying no to things that don't align with your goals, and putting yourself first. It might sound a little selfish, but sometimes you gotta be a little selfish. So honestly, like the biggest lessons that I've learned so far is life is a journey, it's not a race, and it's not a checklist. Every day is a new story. Continue writing it. And on top of that, challenges are inevitable, but we can choose how we want to handle them. Like, do we want to take the simple route to get to the finish line, or do we want to make it so complicated for ourselves that we're going to make it to the finish line, however we're going to be tired when we do? And to also slow down and just give myself time to figure it out, because I don't have all the answers now. So letting go of the pressure to do everything perfectly and trusting that I will eventually be guided to where I need to be. So yeah, life will always have its challenges, but you can choose how you face them. You don't always have to choose the hardest, most complicated plan in order to feel fulfilled. Sometimes slowing down, simplifying, and trusting your instincts can lead you to a life that feels a lot lighter, easier, and filled with more joy. So just take the time to ask yourself, what can I do today to make my life a little bit more simpler? What do I need to let go to make life a little bit more easier? And what can I do today to make my life more happier? And before I end this episode, I just wanted to leave you guys with a poem from one of my favorite books, honestly. It's called Inward by young Pablo. I still butcher his name till this day. Anywho, this honestly says to repeat it daily, but let's just get into it. It says, notice the stories you hold in your mind. Let go of the ones that cause tension. Let's give that a moment to sink in and decide to let go of the stories that hold those tensions in our minds. Anywho, that is all I have for you guys today. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining me and spending your Tuesday morning with me. If you like this episode, please don't forget to leave a comment and a review. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, family, anybody who might like it. And if you guys ever want to connect, I am on Instagram at Deanne'sPOV. I hope that you guys all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the year. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.